So, all right, we'll start with JPB, and then we'll go to Jonathan, and then we'll move from there.
Okay, so question for Brian, and then just bring it on down. Question for Brian is shift averages. So what are the minimum standards for shift averages? That's the first part of the question. And then for all of you, do you have similar standards, and also how do you track those standards?
That's a great question. The simple answer is this. We track shows on 4 different levels. We have marketplace events, traditional events, key events, and state fairs. And we track stats independently for these different levels because I don't want to disincentivize a top CSP from working a marketplace event because it might reflect poorly on their overall averages. Y'all follow me on that? And so the simple answer is this. What are our standards? I can tell you standards, but I don't think they matter because I think it has more to do with where is your team currently at and then what's your plan to help that grow. So I think you need to figure out what is your team's overall average, and then you compare that to people's individual average. That's the way to let it scale in a healthy way instead of arbitrarily taking a number from some other division. Now, I will throw one other quick note out. I talked to Dave about this yesterday, and I told him that I love, like, the analytics stuff is unbelievable. But for me as a coordinator, a very useful thing would be able to have the ability to tag shows. So that way I could tag every show as marketplace, traditional, key event. And he said he loved the idea. He said that they've already sent it to the programmers, and I don't know when, but at some point in the future, we will have that ability. So that way it'll be much easier than to run a report, just sort it based off category of event, and then you pull the averages, boom. So again, Dave Bush comes through again.
Yeah, I think with this Q&A session will be most effective. Like, I looked at your talk before I did my talk, which is why I knew you would just crush it, and I was like, I don't need to cover half of this stuff about structure, and that was a perfect answer, so we could just move on to the next question probably. So we can get more information out.
Yes, I have nothing to add.
No, it's good. Besides the event analytics, we've just done it old school. We have like an Excel sheet where we keep track of literally everything, like all orders, order numbers, ROR, average order, average shift order, all that kind of stuff. I like numbers.
Cool. All right, Jonathan.
On a personal note, I want to give a very special shout out to both Brian and Jason. Jason is my mentor for 2 years, and Brian is a dear friend. Our team jumped by 50% this past year. We're looking to grow by 50% again, and literally it was almost copy and paste from implementation of things that you pioneered. So thank you very deeply to the both of you. My question is more for Brian and Jason, but I'm open to anyone. Brian, you mentioned especially with the state fairs. I've had the privilege of being invited in a couple times for events that you guys have. At what point do you make the decision that, hey, this is an event that we really need to bring a guest in for? Is it has to do with shift average? Is it something to do with performance of the event overall? And also, how did that initial conversation go to your team with explaining, hey, we have people to staff, but we're going to let someone else come in and do that?
It's a great question. We kind of already hit that. We always refer back to the policies. Like, again, I'm a policy wonk, and so it's very simple. If we have a traditional event and we do not have the sufficient number of people that are eligible to work traditional events who can work it, we'll bring a guest in. We have brought Dante in. We've brought Frank. We have brought Justin Ledford, and not just for state fairs. Like, if we have a traditional event and we can't staff it appropriately, we will always go to guests first, and this is with our DVM's approval. This is a thing, before we will lower our standards to simply staff the event, even though some of the lower people on our team are excited by that. But because they know no exceptions are made, there's no use crying and moaning about it. Just get your averages up.
Yeah, the standards are there for a reason, and so it makes 100%, sense to not lower them and have people go lose money or, not get the results that you could have for your team. And bringing people in is just super powerful as well from what I've seen from what you guys have done. It's like their averages are just, skyrocketing. And so when we bring people in, usually it's because of a staffing issue, because we're not going to lower our standards and have someone work like a $400 shift when they're not ready.
The only thing I'll add to that, because I do help with the state fair process, is I would just say the bigger and more valuable the event is, the further in advance you need to be thinking those things through and your staffing and all that sort of stuff. So state fair specifically, we're answering the questions about our staff, who's going to qualify. Like, we're really having those strategy sessions. We're starting them in 2 weeks. So we'll start having those conversations, and we'll have the answer on how many guests do we believe we need, what's our shift inventory going to be, and all that sort of stuff before the spring campaign's over. So even though our event doesn't happen until September, October. So who else has a question? Yeah.
It's just a small thing, but like usually what I'm looking for too when I'm like inviting people into the bigger events are things that I want to see in my people, like when they're growing. Like I invited Dawid into our state fair and Fonz, and like I did that specifically because Dawid is a Silver Cup winner. We had somebody in the Silver Cup race. We had Fonz come in, and Fonz has already won his sword at that point. And so I had Vern, who was on our team going to win our sword. Sam was going to win her sword. Nick won his sword last year, but Fonz also won a Rolex too. And Nick ended up winning his Rolex too. So I just want to put people, it's kind of like the circle of influence. You just kind of like surround yourself with the people you want to be. And that's kind of how I chose those few little things.
We've actually involved our team for the state fairs in voting who they want to invite in. Like, it's not like Brian and I are just sitting in there going, yes, sorry. Yes, we let them, I'm sorry, we let them nominate. And then, so we're not just sitting in a corner one place going, let's invite in, you know, Jason. Like, you know what I mean? We're just making that decision because what we want. We let them nominate people, and then we decide from there who we want to bring in after also speaking with the DVMs and looping them into that conversation, that decision-making process. So who else has a question?
Thank you. So my question is with relation to veteran members of the team who have maybe been part of the organization for years and years and years. How do you handle the changing of standards where maybe according to old standards, certain expectations were set and now the expectations have changed? How do you handle pushback and eliminate entitlement?
What a great question. How many of you have had this experience and you want to know the answer to this question really bad right now? Just curious. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to empower you guys. By the way, this is I just asked that because it's a very common thing, right? We all deal with it because as you grow, things change, right? And you want to become really good at this conversation and leading, it's not even a conversation, leading this process with your organization. This is all about your level of influence as a leader, right? And so I'm going to empower you guys to do your absolute best, at giving the goods on this if you've had these experiences.
Two are the most veteran and experienced programs almost in the company. I would love to hear
Tough. Leave the team if, no, I'm just kidding. All right. Yeah, do it. So I think the two main things are doing these in a way that it's for the next, well, whatever you guys do, campaign, month, year, whatever it is. So our policy is like the nominating thing, right? You can bring that to us. We do it all, but we won't make any decisions till the next year. So we give everybody enough time to prepare whatever it's going to be, take their input, and then any new standards that are going to be, everybody knows. So I think the big thing is it's not just, we've decided, sorry, you lose all your shifts next month because you're not on the program anymore. And then we do have priority in place, and we just do that on purpose. So if you have worked the event and do it all that, maybe you don't get to pick first, but you still get to work the event. So we feel priority provides that stability that Brian was talking about earlier. So you'll still get to work the event even if it's with the new whatever other person that has their sales up now or whatever it is. So yeah, we project it out farther, and then priority still stays in place no matter what.
I think it starts with the vision and idea that the DVM owns all the shifts. They're in charge. And the DVM and the coordinator together work to create standards and to create the structure to generate the most CPO as a division and grow the most people in the division through that process. So that is a belief that everyone is bought into in your team. If it's not, then I think it's something you gotta work on. But once that's there, then it's more of a thing like, here's a new standard. And if you can make it a standard that you can bring up to them and make it their idea through the meeting and then vote on it and craft it that way, that's key. And just having the conversations ahead of time with the key people that will help to fuel that vote when the vote happens, So one-on-one conversations before the meeting about your vision for why these things should be in place, these new structures, and they're bought in, and then you all vote on it as a group, and that one person that doesn't like that standard is not, you're not saying, hey, you're not individually going each person telling them, here's our new standard, here's a new standard, here's a new standard. It's like the whole team has decided that this is what makes the most sense, and you know, that person will accept it much more easily than any other way that I've found. But the thing really is about it, there's certain things that you and the division manager just simply need to make standards versus having being voted on. And you know, they just need to understand that the reason it's there is not for selfish reasons for any particular person, but here is the legitimate reason why this is the best like standard or structure to grow. Whether that's pushing someone to sell a little bit more per month to hit the level they need to be at, because they can do it if they really had to. And so you make that standard, and then now they're going to sell more because of the standard, and then they can sell more because of the next standard, that type of thing. It's really in their best interest, and it's not like you're creating a crazy thing that's unachievable, right? So there's just some random thoughts that came to mind on that.
Do you mind? I was literally going to say, I honestly have nothing to add. I was just going to, to advance the ball. The two kind of powerful conversations that I think you have to have, exactly what these guys said. Number one is just the DVM. And that's very hard because, again, DVMs, they're trying to retain people. They're about relationships a lot of times. And a lot of times they're kind of people pleasers. It's hard to hold a firm line when they feel like it's going to end up hurting the bottom line. And so one of the really powerful conversations I've had with both DVMs is, number one, I need you to always answer anytime someone comes to you with something with, what did Brian say? And that's hard, but that's so important. The happiest day of my life as a coordinator was the first time my very people pleaser of a manager goes, hey, what did Brian say, by the way? And they're like, well, and John's like, you got to go talk to Brian. Like, if you haven't even talked to him yet, there's no reason this should be coming to me. But the powerful conversation with my DVM was, hey man, you know, please empower me to work in your interests and the interests of the program and the interests of the division. And part of that too, I said, honestly, I will be the buffer. I will be the shield. I'll be the bad guy when there has to be a bad guy, because sometimes there's a bad guy because it's human interactions. But the other conversation is how you have it with that individual person, and you just have to be direct. You just have to be direct. And the reality is, I kind of did a few lines of it. That's literally the conversation. Thank you for everything you have done. You've been so important to the program. We want you. We need you. But this change is happening. I would rather it happen with you, but it's happening either way. So you can either kind of be a part of what we're building, but if you can't, that's okay. I love you. I respect you. I'll buy you a beer. But the reality is you're not going to be able to work events anymore. And you just have to be direct and don't apologize for it. And then if people lash out to that emotionally, if they try to get a rise out of you, just try not to take the bait. I think the worst version of that conversation I ever had, they were like, show me in my contract where it says I have to abide by your policies. And I said, fair. Show me in your contract where it says you get to work events. To which point they went, at which point they were like, bah. And I was like, we don't need to do this. This doesn't need to go this way. Let's bring it down. How's your family? Let's do a lap. And then let's kind of come back to what you're really feeling and what we can do about it. Stand your ground.
Good answers. Yes or yes? Was that good? Yes or yes? All right, awesome. So who else has a question? We got time for like one, maybe two more. All right, we're going to go to Mr. Southard in the back here.
Does it ever, so there's definitely the business side of things, but is there any, has anybody tapped into the personality side of getting these two people to work together at this particular show is a better outcome than not, or just kind of random and whatever they think, whatever the team thinks? Does that make sense? Okay, so from a business side, when you look at the numbers and you see these two people that work together, sometimes, well, you're not there, but you pretty much can tell that their numbers are 25% of what they could be. If they work with this other person, even though they may not hang with that person that well, their numbers go up by 50% on the back end. You know, I mean, basically, whether that be CPO, orders, service calls, that kind of thing. Has anybody started in that venue of tracking that information, or is it just, you know, let's just get the ball rolling first? Does that make sense? No? Okay, cool.
I haven't tracked it.
I would say not specific tracking, but we do have that. Like, are you talking about just wanting to grow more, or are you talking about like personality clashes? I guess would be my question. Just yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess I haven't tracked that either. So we haven't done anything with this person on a team versus these two other people on a team, right? And done all that. So yeah, I mean, if it's just wondering, then I would say we start tracking it, because I don't know if there'd be like a type A personality works better with type B, and yeah. All that.
I mean, I guess the goal of what you want to do if you did track it is to figure out ways to make people work together more effectively anyways, right? And then identify, these two people for some reason are 20% less when they're working together. So what would be ways to make it so that people who have potential issues or aren't flowing well together? So, I mean, it'd be things like, hey, just so you know, I mean, you could just cover it with the whole team. Like, hey, when you have a past customer come up and they're working with a new customer, how often are you interrupting them and say, hey, sorry to interrupt, but how long have you had your Cutco for? Let the customer do the talking, and then testimonial, boom, and then you close them on past customer stuff. And then if another person comes up, are you guys doing that? And then what are the 3 or 4 other things that help to make it so that generates more sales, throughout the shift process? And if people aren't meshing well together, that means that they still need to do those things because they're making each other sell more still, right? And just having that conversation about, hey, I don't care if you guys get along or you don't get along, we all want to sell more. So it's important for us to implement these 4 things when you're working with someone, regardless of who it is. And here's why it's important. And here's the vision of how much more our team can sell potentially this year if we take that and apply that to these 8,000 shifts that we have or whatever. And just make it so people, it doesn't matter who they're working with, they're going to help each other anyways.
Yeah, I would just say for us, short answer is no, we don't. But it doesn't mean we don't notice those trends. When we thought about introducing it, it just adds too many variables for us to manage. So when we have noticed it, the things that we have done, number one is we encourage people to really proactively pick shifts when they're doing it based on the people they're the most excited to work with. Number 2, we have conversations with people when we see that like their averages are lower about saying, hey, and it's not about why do you sell less when you work with Brian, but it's more about like, hey, how do you feel you're able to create energy in the booth? Like, how do you feel like you're more susceptible to who you're working with? And you kind of, you just sort of posit it without the data and sort of let them kind of show where they're at, and maybe it's an opportunity for growth. But the best version of the conversation I've ever had is this. I had one person in particular that there was some challenges, and so I showed them where there was one person on the team that worked with them always sold more. And I just asked them, I said, man, what do you think you do? Because this person always performs better than when they're with you. How do you think you do with that? And they just shared some stuff, and I'd like to think maybe that helped them double down. But then they asked a very powerful question was, well, what does it look like when other people work with me? And I was like, I mean, I can show you if you want. And I just used data to let the story tell itself. So that was the best version of the conversation I've ever had. 9 times out of 10, though, you just challenge people to sort of continue their path of growth so they're less susceptible to the influences of people that might drag them down.
So it's nothing that I track inherently, but it is something I think that we all notice, just being kind of like attuned to numbers and kind of like general emotions in your team. But like, I think what I've done just to kind of like manage those little things are like periodic check-ins, like with what our events are doing. So I'll check in with some of our larger guys on the team and say, hey, how'd your weekend go? How was working with X and Y and Z person? Is there anything that you would like to see maybe different in the future? Is there anything that you feel you could improve on? And then I'll also call the partner of that, that team from that weekend and see how things went. And if there's an issue, it can be handled directly, and if not, then you can just kind of mediate the two to kind of work out those issues. Because I think a lot of times what happens is like there are things that go unsaid with your teams, and like even though there are clear defined rules, still sometimes there are little things that happen, and like little things tend to build up after a while. So I think handling those, immediately and effectively are the best way to go about it.
Or you just drop an outdoorsman in the middle and you go, work it out.
Yeah. All right. So I want you guys to write something down really quick, just as a lesson from listening to these guys right now. Something that they all have in common in what they're sharing about having these conversations. Write this down. Positively framed, generative questions. Positively framed, generative questions. If you want to become a massive influencer with your people, stop focusing on the negative and the issues and like what they're doing wrong, and ask yourself, if I'm going to have this conversation, how can I frame it in the positive? And what's the question I can ask that will help them generate a productive answer towards moving forward in the way we want? Okay? Think about that. Just let that sink in for a second. Positively framed, generative questions. If I'm going to have this conversation with someone, how can I frame it to the positive? Like Brian said, I didn't talk about the 80 people they're working with that they suck with. I talked about the one person they work with that they do great with. Positive, right? And then he asked a question that empowered them to generate an answer that would let them move forward, that would open the door. And then they had their own process of self-discovery of all the shit that they've been causing in their wake, right? So, sorry, all the crap, my bad. Sorry, video. All the crap they've been causing. All the crap they've been causing in their wake. Yeah, of course. The guy who says don't swear to all the speakers just swore. My bad. That's great. Thank you, Jason. Raising my standard, right? So I love it. It's great. So, but ask yourself that question, right? Anytime you're getting ready to have one of those conversations, Jason just shared, like, hey, we have this conversation. We do it in this way. And it was all positively framed. And they were all questions that empowered his team to generate their own answers. But because it's positively framed, it's forward focus, right? It's going to focus them towards growth, and you can facilitate the process of them having them discovering the answers that you want them to discover, like Nick was talking about, right? And Robert, these guys have all given you tons of examples of positively framed generative questions. If you go back and watch this video in a couple months once it's posted, I would encourage and challenge you to look and write down every question they asked and ask yourself, like, temper it. Is this positively framed? And is the answer to this question going to be generative towards a positive future or progressive future? And what you're going to find, what I noticed, is that every one of those questions you'll be able to check that box. You'll be able to check both those boxes. And that's the secret, right? When you get people focusing on what's great and you get them focusing on how they can do even better moving forward, and you're facilitating the process of helping them discover their answers, you become a better influencer. Because you're not just speaking at people, you're talking with people, and you're facilitating their growth. And that's where you really become the best coordinator, best leader that you can be for people. Think about it. With your DVMs, same thing. With your new reps, with your district managers, everybody that's involved in your organization, if you use that approach, it'll change a lot of stuff for you. So let's give these guys a big round of applause. Huge, huge.